Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. My name is Tim Shaw. I am one of the co-curators and founders of the Walking Festival of Sound. And this year, an entirely online program of events have included workshops, artist talks, seminars, listening scores, provocations, and other interventions from a range of artists from all over the world. The Walking Festival of Sound began in 2019, and we did an event in Stockholm and one in Newcastle in England. Then in 2020, the pandemic hit and we had to cancel, and this year we're doing it online. In 2019, I would never have thought that I would be doing a walking festival or a sound walking festival online. But here we are, and it's been a great success, and we've had some really interesting events and a great response from everybody. I'd really like to thank everybody for tuning in. I know that a lot of our lives at the moment are mediated through these machines that we look at and that we're listening through tonight. So it's really great for you to turn up and dedicate some time to this. We've had a really attentive and amazing audience. So I'd like to shout out to everybody who's managed to tune in so far and engage with the events. It's really appreciated by Jacek and I. To give you a bit more of an overview of the festival, the Walking Festival of Sound is a transdisciplinary event exploring the role of walking through and listening to our everyday surroundings. It combines a number of free and public events, including walking performances, walking seminars, and other events as well. The Walking Festival of Sound facilitates a meeting point for an international network of practitioners and researchers interested in sound and walking. Through a diverse program of events, we explore how walking and listening practices can augment and challenge the way we perceive, navigate through, and care for our shared environments. The Walking Festival of Sound in 2021 is kindly funded by the Culture of Solidarity Fund. So this is the last in our series of artist talks, or artist walks as we're calling them, and we're really pleasured tonight to introduce Elena Biserna. Jacek will introduce her in a second, and after her talk we'll have a chance for some Q&A, some question and answer with Elena. So please put any questions you have in the chat on YouTube, and we will moderate those questions at the end. So now I will hand the word over to Jacek, and he will introduce Elena.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for this introduction and a reminder where we are at the moment when it comes to the festival. I don't want to prolong too much, but I wanted to just mention a couple of things. As you've probably noticed during the festival, one of the streams, kind of implicit streams within the festival, deals with the notion or practice of border and bordering. We had an open call before the festival started that specifically was trying to interrogate what does the soundscape of border or borders mean today in our world, kind of torn by different types of crises. And we got an amazing amount of contributions, about 90, and out of those we selected 8. Initially we were planning to do 4, but they were just amazing, mind-blowing, and we really wanted to give justice to the variety that we received. So I just want to remind our audience that they are still available to be listened to on our website. If you go to the radio section, there is a stream with introductions by Tim to every single piece, and then you can also read about every single piece and also allow yourself to wander to the websites of the authors. So borders have been present during our festivals, and also if you would like to check during this week specifically, because it's not too dense, you might want to check Anna Nacher's piece. Anna is a professor at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and she made a piece about ecotones, which are those transient sites between two different ecosystems. And she took as an example or a case place in Krakow, which is a zoological garden, And it's very interestingly located because it's in the middle of the forest. So you have this amazing kind of a border line between the kind of constrained natural life constrained by humans and the life which is more free to some extent. And she's been investigating what's happening precisely at the border of the zoological garden. So you might want to check this piece. It's available as an instruction. Unfortunately, it's primarily dedicated to those who reside in Krakow or who are in Krakow, but you can still listen to the piece that she composed out of the field recordings and also read a little bit and try to kind of synchronize with that kind of aesthetics and her way of thinking about borders. Yeah, I think without further ado, I want to introduce today's speaker. We are very grateful to have with us Elena Biserna, who's a scholar and independent curator based in Marseille. She's associate researcher at PRISM and team ed at Université Paris 8. Her interests are focused on listening and on contextual time-based art practices in relationship with urban dynamics, socio-cultural processes, the public and political sphere. She has taught at Aix-en-Provence in Marseille, at Marseille University, and the Academy of Fine Arts in Bologna, Italy. She's given talks at different conferences, festivals, and events. Her articles and interviews have appeared in several both local and international publications, including Amsterdam University Press, Cambridge Scholar, and Bloomsbury. She co-curates the series of La Membrane, the seminar Pratique de l'écoute, écoute de pratique at IMERA Marseille, and co-edits the column with Carole Risek at the Revue and Corrige. I'm sorry for my pronunciation. I'm really not into French language, unfortunately. She's collaborated with a lot of international and local organizations. You can find her more extensive bio on our website, and also please make sure to check her amazing website with a lot of links to all those projects that she's been developing and co-developing with other artists interested in similar issues. I hope I didn't miss anything, Elena. If there is something I did miss, please correct me and add to your presentation. Thank you again, everyone, for coming to this talk. Elena, the digital floor is yours.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tim and Jacek. I also don't, I'm not very good in pronouncing other languages. I'm already always lost in translation between French, English, and Italian. Thanks to you for organizing this, and thanks everybody for being here together, although in different contexts in different countries. This is an experience, as Tim said at the beginning, that has become quite usual for most of us since 1 year or so, when traveling has become more and more difficult, even for white bodies like mine with an European passport, and we have all been subjected to very strong restriction on our freedom of movement. So the title of my talk is, I try to share the screen. Does it work? Okay, so the title of my talk is SoundBorderscapes, an attempt to listen to border experiences and practices in the sanitary crisis. Because, well, I have started to work on borders and boundaries in several years, but I have to admit that the sanitary crisis has given to this vector of my work, of my research, another meaning or another urgency, if you like, borders. I remember that until a few years ago, we thought that we had broken free of them. The rhetoric of globalization presented us with an image of the world without borders, where nation state had lost their importance and the free flow of goods and people was granted. But in fact, more than ever, borders are assuming an increasing importance in all aspects of our lives, in every field of our lives, and are also taking on new forms. In our globalized world, paradoxically, borders proliferate, multiply, while becoming more fluid and infiltrating new spaces and new systems. And this well before the arrival of the pandemics. Since at least the fall of the two towers, we have witnessed, I quote the philosopher Paul B. Preciado here, a return to the idea of the physical border as a condition for restoring national integrity and political sovereignty. So to situate myself, I'm in Marseille. I live here since almost 6 years now. I was born in Italy, which is one of the countries that is more involved in the management of migration fluxes from to the European Union. Marseille is in the middle, at the center of the Mediterranean. It is called a gateway to Africa, but the Mediterranean is marked by a multiplicity of ambiguities. In the ancient world, it has often represented a connected space of economic, social, cultural, and political exchange, but today it is reconfigured into a liquid but inaccessible entity which separates North and South, that separates Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. A border that defines the so-called fortress Europe. And like the Mediterranean, many other borders are today more inaccessible than ever. Europe and the US have built themselves as spaces closed to migration and migrants. And not only borders become stronger, they also take on a new form and move to new places and new spaces. We used to imagine border as dividing lines separating different territorial entities considered as homogeneous within them, the nation states. This is the image which is conveyed by the map, such as the one that we studied at school, where each country is identified with a different color and is divided by others by these lines that define the line of demarcation and division between different countries. And indeed, this binary way of imagining territories corresponds to the modern logic of the nation states, but also to the Cartesian conception of space and to the cartographic device, to the map. And this conception of space is neither neutral nor transparent, because cartography is a form of representation that was created in a specific time during modernity and during colonialism, and primarily in Europe. So this linear image of the border was first established in Europe and then globalized through colonialism. And it assumes a particular significance today because it materializes in the many walls that we see around the world, the border between Palestine and Israel, the border between Mexico and the US, just to name the most controversial maybe. And as I said, this image of the border is not neutral. It produces a vision of the world and adds to imagine borders first and foremost as devices of exclusion, focuses on the dichotomy between interior and exterior. But first of all, there are different borders coexisting. So we have linguistic, symbolic, cultural, economic, and geopolitical borders. And sometimes these borders overlap, but sometimes they don't. And here I go back to a very important book for me that has been fundamental for my way of understanding borders, which is a book which was written by Brett Nelson and Sandro Mezzadra and entitled Borders Myth. And they say that the logic of nation states make all these borders coincide with the boundaries of their territories. But we know that this homogenization is a construction of nation states rather than something that pre-exists nation states. And in addition, borders are increasingly mobile and pervasive, because they materializes in places that are sometimes very far from the line of separation between countries. So in airports, in biometric recognition system, refugee camps, courts, surveillance system integrated in our own mobile devices. And in short, they materialize themselves in any context marked by practices of control and selection. Mezzadra and Nelson point out that borders today do not have the function of blocking global flow, but they have become central elements in their articulation. So they're not line of separation, but a network of control and selection devices. They divide, but they also connect. They filter and organize the passage of people, of money, of goods, and objects. They allow certain form of mobility and circulation, so cheap labor, financial exchanges, the mobility of artists and intellectuals like me, and prevent others, so mainly economic or political migration. And this articulation is determined in large part by the neoliberal logic. These transformations are in fact closely linked to globalization and neoliberalism, and to a project of freedom of movement which follow an economic agenda and creates different form of exclusion according to its objectives. And in this context, border become privileged size to examine more broadly the dynamics of global capitalism. If we think about it, the most pressing cultural, social, economic, and political issues are played out precisely at the border, or better, they emerge from the dynamics between practices of border enforcement and practices of border transgression, border crossing. And in order to account for all these transformations, border studies is the disciplines that studies from an interdisciplinary point of view borders and their meanings, association, effects. So border studies have elaborated new notions and new theoretical frameworks, introducing more complex, more process-based understanding of borders. And one of these notions that I find particularly generative is that of borderscapes. This term was first used in the field of art. I think that the first time it was used, it was in the title of a performance by Guillermo Gomez Peña and Roberto Cifuente in 1999. And subsequently, after that, it was taken up by various writers in academic literature to propose a more complex understanding of the border. Thanks to this suffix scapes, this word suggests a mobile and temporal notion of the border, a reality which is always in the process of becoming and changes in time and in space. I quote here the Italian anthropologist Chiara Brambilla, who writes, it is a non-static but fluid and fluctuating space, formed and traversed by plurality of bodies, discourses, practices, and relationships that reveal continuous definition and reconstruction of division between the inside and the outside, citizen and foreigner, host and traveler, through multiple national, regional, racial, and symbolic borders. So the border as a space that is constructed and transgressed by a multiplicity of practices, bodies, and discourses. And also as spaces which are performed through spatial practices in the sense proposed by Desserteau. I quote again Brambilla, differently from boundaries of nation states that, according to the modern territorialist geopolitical imaginary, are invented as lines on the flat and two-dimensional surface of the map, borderscapes are multidimensional and mobile constructions that are inhabited by Michel Desserteau's spatial practices. In the borderscape, representation and practices produce a multiplicity of interrelation that call into question modern state-centric geographies and politics of identity. The ability of borderscape to bring together experiences and representation helps to develop a performative approach to borders. The borderscape concept allows us to move beyond the often criticized gap between practices and representation and enable us to abandon the essentialization of border as division lines of modern political maps, moving instead towards an understanding of contemporary borders as continually performed and recomposed by sets of contingent performances revealing their dynamic character. So Brian Villa describes a border which is built through our spatial practices and through our representation. And in fact, this term also revealed the culturally constructed nature of the border. So the way in which the border is perceived and the role of visual, narrative, and performative representation in shaping the very meaning and the very effects of the border. And well, since my work is focused on sounds and listening since many years, it was quite obvious for me to compare this notion to that of soundscape, that I imagine most of the people that are listening know very well, maybe better than me. So I will not go into detail. Paul Rodoy defined it as the sonic environment surrounding the sentient. And this environment, by definition, is always dynamic, temporal, and relational, created and recreated in the listening experience. Through the interaction among bodies, spaces, and practice. And also these terms underpins an ecology, a relationship between subject and context. So both terms, in my view, emphasize the dynamism, the fluidity, and the multiplicity of reality. They focus on the culturally constructed nature of reality. They say that reality is not static and it is not natural, but complex and cultural. So continually defined and redefined by a constellation of practices and discourses. And so they also both these terms highlight the key role played by individual and collective subject in the production, definition, and materialization of reality. And so starting from these analogies, I have imagined the term SoundBorderscape to explore a series of projects, artistic projects, engaging with geopolitical borders through sound and through listening. And maybe we can listen to some of them together. Recording at the border or recording the border. There are many artists who have explored border areas between states through field recordings. There are really quite a lot of examples, and the radio program of this festival includes some project based on field recording of border areas. I just would like to mention the project entitled Muro, Wall, by Eric Ruiz Arellano, that focuses on the wall separating the US from Mexico. Well, I invite you to go and listen to it on the website of the Walking Festival of Sound. And here I would like to listen with you to another wall with this installation made by Jakob Kierkegaard in 2013. Also, this project addresses the materiality of the border by focusing on a wall. And maybe the wall that most directly and dramatically conveys an image of separation and material exclusion, that is the war between Israel and Palestine. Kierkegaard has made a series of field recordings around Bethlehem, along the system of barriers that Israel erected in the West Bank after the Second Intifada. And this wall was initially presented as a security measure in response to an emergency, but then it has become normalized, becoming de facto the border between Israel and the Palestinian territories. So while Israel considers the barrier as a means of protection, on the other side of the wall, the wall is called the wall of racial separation, or the apartheid wall, just to underline the polymorphism of the border. So the fact that borders always mean different things and all have different effects on different social groups. So the artist has recorded on both sides of the wall, close to its surface, by using both ambient microphones and sensor fixed against the concrete wall to detect its vibrations. And its aim was, I quote him, was to listen to the wall and to both sides of it, to hear what the wall itself has to say. So he wanted to reach exactly the same spot on both sides of the world, but actually he was confronted with the physical existence of the world. And so the obstacle linked to his transit through checkpoints, the intimidating presence of watchtowers, all these difficulties, as the artist has written, I quote him again, emphasize the feeling of separation, alienation, and forced isolation that the wall creates. So this feeling of separation is also emphasized in the series of photographs that the artist took during his exploration, and that depicts the wall and the Israel defensive measure. And here you can see, I put some images. But if we listen to the recording, what emerges is a completely hybrid SoundBorderscape. And I would like to share with you. It is a SoundBorderscape in which the constant presence of the low frequency of the wall vibrations merge with the sounds of vehicles or a muezzin call to prayer from a minaret in the Palestinian territories. From an auditory point of view, the walls become porous and permeable. And the title of the project, which is Through the Wall, directly evokes the notion of crossing. And this sonic dematerialization of the border is further strengthened by the layout of the installation, which is a wall, as you can see, for example, in this picture, built in the middle of the exhibition space. And the wall has a series of speakers installed into the structure, diffusing some of the field recording, but we always have no idea of which part of the wall the field recording were taken. And in this way, and maybe despite the artist's intention, the project deconstructs the materiality of the wall and underlines its amorphous nature, its penetrability, and its openness to being crossed. So through listening, the wall becomes a membrane, a process, a sequence of events rather than a line or a dividing structure. And this border between Israel and Palestine has been explored also by Mayra Asher in her composition Nord-Jordan Valley 2018. That I strongly invite you to go and listen on her Bandcamp, which also opens up to another way of dealing with border. Because in other projects, recording and amplifying the border take on a more explicitly militant dimension, and the microphone and the mixing console are used as tool for political involvement. In this case, is giving voice to the border and making the border heard becomes a practice of dissensual politics, because the microphone is directed at the conflicts that keep taking place at the border. And here I quote again Mezzadra and Nelson when they say, so those struggles that take shape around the unstable line between the inside and the outside, between inclusion and exclusion. So by revealing the conflicts at or on the border and making them audible, this project used field recording and soundscape composition as a political action was aimed to disrupt, so to unmake through listening and resonance the apparatus that materializes the dichotomy between inclusion and exclusion, and therefore also the ways in which roles are distributed in the political community. And I would like to listen to just one example, which is quite old, but very important for me. It is La Economía Nueva, Operation Gatekeeper, published in 2002 by UltraRed. UltraRed is a collective formed in the United States in 1994 within the framework of the ADS struggles. But over the year, this collective has evolved in an international network comprising artists, activists, researchers, to explore the connection between art practice and activism. And they do so through various kinds of interdisciplinary projects that can take very different forms, but that address social conflict through listening. As the collective says, I quote them, exploring acoustic space as an initiative of social relations, UltraRed take up the acoustic mapping of contexted spaces and histories, utilizing sound-based research toward militant sound investigations that directly engage the organizing and analysis of political struggles. And the group has addressed migration in several works, but La Economía Nueva, I think, is their first project of acoustic mapping of border struggles. And we come back to the border between the US and Mexico that we mentioned earlier. The album is composed of 4 tracks that are entirely composed from field recording that are were taken at the San Isidro port of entry, so the largest of the 3 access points between San Diego and Tijuana. And they were taken on December 10, 2000. So during the demonstration against the borders enforcement measure called Operation Gatekeeper. To give you some context, Operation Gatekeeper is a series of actions launched in 1994. So the same year of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And thus when trade between Mexico, the United States and Canada was liberalized. And it developed as a series of control mechanisms, so a system of physical barriers, underground sensors, new checkpoint, the first immigration court at the border, and the system of biometric identification system. And so the complete militarization of the border between the US and Mexico. And in this framework, the operation has become a sort of case in point of the contradictions between the increasing liberalization of the flows of goods, capital, and labor in the global landscape, and the parallel strengthening of protecting measures against illegal immigration. So it is an example of this process of selection, filtering, and differentiation that, as we said, as many theorists have written, is the main function of the border today. And in La Economía Nueva, UltraRed take up this contradiction by composing or organizing a soundscape of struggle. I would like to listen to the first track.
Through the signing of the Treaty Guadalupe Hidalgo to guarantee things like an open border, another broken treaty, very free flow of money ever before in history, world duty free.
do something that I shouldn't do. I cut the piece in the middle because it is quite long and well, time go fast. So clearly this piece is characterized by an approach to composition that is much more linked to glitch, electronic and ambient music. And Ultra-Red rely on some of the techniques and terminology of the musical avant-garde. In this album, the techniques of electronic music and glitch in particular, but shifting them on a political ground. And another strategy that appears in many works is to use storytelling as a way to focus on different perceptions, experiences, and narration of borders for more than one voice. So on the singularity and plurality also of our own identification and way of experiencing the borders. And I had an example, but maybe I go a bit fastest. I would like also another time to invite you to go and listen to the pieces that have been collected through the call of the Walking Festival of Sounds, where there is an example of this way of focusing on storytelling. So the piece "No Man's Land" by Flora Zajcek, a sound piece made starting from recordings of her grandmother recalling the way she escaped with her partner from Czechoslovakia in 1948 and their experience of the border and of border crossing. I invite you to go and listen to this piece. And the border can also be enacted through the voice in less narrative way. And this is the case of Mediterraneo by Anna Raimondo. I mentioned the Mediterranean and the reinforcement of bordering measures in this sea, transforming the sea in a liquid but inaccessible border. In this audiovisual installation, Anna embodies this border, the Mediterranean as a border, by giving it a vocal expression. And I would like to show you some extract of the video, which is much longer, but
Mediterraneo, 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 Mediterraneo.
I try to go back to, where is it? To my presentation that I don't find anymore. Why is that? Ah, okay. Yeah. So it was really an editing of some fragments from the audiovisual installation, which is much longer. But Anna's voice here repeats the word Mediterranean, so Mediterranean over and over. And the rhythm is hypnotic, and she articulates the word, every syllabus very clearly. But progressively, the artist's mouth becomes filled with water, and it struggles to make comprehensible the word Mediterranean. She doesn't stop, but she is increasingly breathless. And finally, the voice becomes one with water, and the word melts into pure materiality, a sound wave that retains just the rhythmic quality of language. And this verbal shipwreck expresses the artist's powerlessness in the face of the tragedy that unfolds in her own sea. But this effort as at signification, in my view, also serves as a metaphor for a quest for survival. So through the water, beyond the sea, beyond the borders. And the conflict that define the very nature of the border are also invested in the language gulf in the Shouting Valley by Lawrence Abu Hamda, who is an artist who has been working quite a lot on control and surveillance systems, as well as the process of exclusion and inclusion in contemporary societies. And often it does so by examining legal practices related to listening, sound identification technologies, and the legal status of voice and language. And these topics are also at the core of this audiovisual installation that explores the oral border between Israel and Syria, and in particular the area of the Golan Heights, which Israel annexed during the Six-Day War, and that still de jure belongs to Syria. So language gulf in the Shouting Valley question this disputed borderscape by focuses on the vocal practices of the Druze, which is an ethnic group that follows a heterodox religious doctrine, originally derived from Shiite Islam, and resides in Lebanon, Syria, Israel, and Jordan. They are considered to be heretics by Muslims, and they embodied this area, cultural and identitarian border, by manifesting a sort of double movement between inclusion and exclusion. Because on the one hand, the community is often mixed with the state in which it lives by participating in their public life, but on the other hand, it maintains a minority status, which is often formally acknowledged by the countries of residence, and the strong sense of transnational identity. So in this installation, the Druze liminal identity, so neither Muslim nor Jewish citizens, but foreigner, both internal and external, becomes a sort of metaphor for the complexity of the border. I show you an extract of the video.
اسمع
خليج اللغة في وادي الصراخ، مقالة سمعية عن الصوت والحدود.
المكان السمعي الذي نحتله الآن هو وادي الصراخ في مرتفعات الجولان، المنطقة المتنازع عليها بين إسرائيل وسوريا منذ بدء اتفاق وقف إطلاق النار بين الطرفين في عام 1967. معظم السكان في الوادي المقسوم هم من الأقلية الدرزية. يأخذ وادي الصراخ اسمه من كونه موقعاً له إطلالة سمعية. إنه المكان الذي يجتمع فيه الدروز بانتظام على مدى 40 عاماً الماضية، حيث يقفون على جانبي خط عدم إطلاق النار السوري الإسرائيلي المنيع، الذي جعل الصراخ وسيلة التواصل الوحيدة مع أهلهم وأصدقائهم على الجانب الآخر.
الله يسلمك، كيف أرض الوطن كيف ترابه.
هذه ليزا حجار. ليزا متخصصة بعلم الاجتماع، أمضت أعواما عديدة وهي تبحث وتدرس المحاكم العسكرية الإسرائيلية.
You know, the use of the military courts has been one of the major mechanisms by which Israel, asserted and maintained its control over Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. the overwhelming and almost exclusive majority of translators are Druze citizens of Israel. So, you know, watching the translators working and listening to what they were saying was something that struck me. Translators would not translate anything except the most rudimentary summaries of anything that was going on. And there were whole sections of, you know, things happening in court. For example, if a defense lawyer and a prosecutor would be talking back and forth to each other, or, you know, a judge was talking about some of the technicalities pertaining to legal representation, many translators wouldn't translate anything at all. But one of the things that translators would say to me when I would ask, why didn't you translate everything so the defendant, who might not understand Hebrew, can understand? And a common answer was, anything the defendant needs to know, his lawyer will tell him later. And that just reinforced one of the broader understandings I derived about the military courts, that it from the point of the defendant, you know, defendants really function as objects in this process, not as subjects.
نحن بغاية الشوق إلكن للوطن ولكل من بيمشي عليه.
Yeah. So the video alternates these long black sequences with short fragments of flickering lo-fi images. And it talks about one of the vocal practices of the Druze at the borders in the Shouting Valley, where after because in this region, the Druze community was divided up after the 6-day war following the Israeli occupation. And so entire families found themselves in different countries. And the only way they had to communicate before the arrival of the internet was to go to the shouting gallery and project their voice through the boundary, sometimes by using megaphones. So the video speaks about this moment of transnational communication in which the personal become public and the voice is used as a means to transgress the restriction imposed by the border. And the video mixes up with an interview that Lawrence made with Lisa Ajar, which is a specialty in sociology of law and international studies, and she complicates even more our perspective of the Druze by telling how they are often used in tribunals and trials against Palestinians in Israel. And they serve often as translator, manifesting their loyalty to the Israel state by offering incomplete translations, since they speak Palestinian. But at the end of the video, we actually realized that these images actually document also a very special day in the Shouting Valley, because an increasingly distorted voice tells us in Arabic that the shooting were taken on 15 May 2011, so the anniversary of the Nakba, when a protest on both sides of the border turned into its transgression, and about 100 Palestinian demonstrators entered Israel from Syria. And at the same time, the same narrator says, whether in the Shouting Valley or in the Israeli military tribunals, the Druze body inhabit the border, and it is their voice which becomes a mode of affirming, negotiating, and sometimes transgressing it. In the courtroom, it is the bilingual voice of the interpreter that becomes the front line between Palestine and Israel. The interpreter's purely vocal border enforces the domination of Palestinian by filtering the speech, allowing the minority of the word to pass into audibility while silencing the rest. And in the Golan Heights, it is through the voice of the Druze that the Israeli-Syrian divide is made distinctly audible. So in this project, the border is conveyed as a complex voice borderscape, which is simultaneously reinforced and crossed, materialized, but also transgressed by the Druze vocal and linguistic practices. So between reduction to silence and amplification, between strategies of control and tactics of resistance, the voice of the Druze embodies an internal, both internal and external border as a contradictory process which is engendered by multiple power relationships. And well, to come back to listening and why I consider it as a hopefully a powerful tool for thinking or rethinking borders. Sound is pervasive, it spreads through space and fill it up, and by its relational nature, it affects everybody it encounters in a vibratory process by making its boundaries osmotic and its demarcation malleables. Sound is neither an object nor a feature of an object, but it is produced by the relationship and interaction between context, objects, and subjects. So this relationality is linked to the material, vibratory nature of sound, its capacity to generate energetic and tactile exchanges, engender a radical permeability, and pass through spaces by spreading from one body to the next, from one material to another. In this way, the auditory sphere is subjected to laws which are profoundly, deeply different from those of the visual sphere, contradicting some of the dichotomies which are deeply entrenched in Western way of thinking. Michael Barr, in this regards, writes, the auditory in the hierarchy of the senses in the Western world ranks after sight, and yet it managed to trouble the visually inspired epistemologies that we take for granted. The clear distinction between subject and object, inside and outside, self and the world. The modern traditional notion of the border was modeled, built, and represented precisely on this epistemology. That can be traced back to Descartes. So the distinction between subject and object, interior and exterior, self and the world. And this idea of the border as a stable divided line between two different territorial entities is based on this opposition. As we have seen, contemporary border studies have far exceeded this linear fixed representation of the border, and the notion of borderscape show this very clearly. But auditory knowledge excludes it a priori, because it is based on ubiquity, immersion, becoming, diffusion, vibration, transmission, and resonance. Sound is a mobile and wandering figure par excellence. It constantly transgresses limits, crosses barriers, and calls monolithic identities into question. Listening generates 360 degrees of spatial knowledge. So without the center and the periphery, always embodied, always situated, always experiential, always affective. And so conveys information not only about the nature of phenomena, but first of all about their relationship, their becoming in time and space, and their plurality. So from the perspective of listening, borders, even when they take the form of a wall or a fortified barrier, become a flux in becoming, engendered by a chain, a sequence of events which are in reciprocal interaction one with each other. So in my point is that from the Druze's vocal tactics to the resonance of metal fence, these sound borderscapes deconstruct the dualism between the inside and the outside to offer an image of the border as a membrane, which is constantly penetrated by the other and by the other crossing, And at the same time, it is articulated, constructed, and transgressed by a multitude of events and relations. And in this way, they not only make audible and amplify the processes that take place at the border or the border itself as a process, but they also propose listening as a useful instrument for a critical epistemology of the border. And well, I try to go very fast here because it is starting from all these thoughts that I had the opportunity to go to the border, and it was in 2019. I was invited by an organization in Hong Kong called Sound Pocket for a mentorship program there. So each year they invite an artist to work with a group of Hong Kong artists in Hong Kong, and then in another country in Asia. And considering the specificity of Hong Kong, I immediately proposed to work around the border, or better, the borders in Hong Kong. But maybe everyone knows about it, but just in case, Hong Kong was founded as a British colony in 1842 after the Opium War, and it was returned to China in 1997. Well, not exactly returned, because Hong Kong did not exist before the colonial period. But from that handover to China, Hong Kong had the spatial status according to the principle one country, two systems, which allows Hong Kong to keep its legal system, its currency, its political system, its internet domain, its laws on immigration. And this system should last 50 years, so until 2047. But we know very well that China has enormously extended its influence at all levels in Hong Kong life. And 98% of the population in Hong Kong is ethnically Chinese, but Hong Kong history during colonialism has produced a cultural and political difference from mainland China. Well, Hong Kong has always been a colonial city, a world financial center, a port, the target of migration from China. It is full of expats. So it has always been a place of transit and never needed a precise local identity until the border with China has started to fade. So obviously, I'm not just talking about the physical border with China, although there are big, huge infrastructural projects that are being developed or already realized in order to connect Hong Kong to China. So, for example, the longest bridge in the world has been built recently. I think it was opened in 2019, if I'm not wrong, to connect Hong Kong to Macau, and now there is just one border crossing between Hong Kong and China, and they are planning to open other two crossings to go from Hong Kong to China and vice versa. So, of course, it is an issue, but the border in Hong Kong manifests itself in a plurality of places and ways. So, of course, in the material border with China, but also in language, in the multiple control and selection apparatuses in urban space, in passport and documents, and first of all, in both individual and collective identification. And there is this book written by Akbar Abbas entitled Hong Kong Culture and the Politics of Disappearance, where the researcher speaks about the cultural self-invention of the Hong Kong subject in a cultural space that he calls space of disappearance. So according to him, the national identity and cultural specificity of Hong Kong has been produced through a process of differentiation with China at the moment when the boundary was fading and the risk of homologation was becoming urgent. So I proposed, when I was invited there, I proposed to focus our program on identity politics in Hong Kong and to do it by exploring its borders, by taking into account the symbolic power of borders in organizing cultural difference. I wanted to start a critical inquiry on the different form of borders, both inside and at the margins of its territory. So I decided to propose a program using, based on listening, walking, sound collecting, and storytelling. I propose to use walking as a form of embodied and situated spatial knowledge, as opposed to the knowledge conveyed by the maps. So allowing us to experience and practice space through immersion and contact, to use listening and sound collecting as tools for imagining borders in dynamic, performative, plural, and relational way, and to use storytelling as a way to focus on different perception and experiences of the border. And well, our challenge was to question the binary opposition produced by nation states. I took inspiration from the Militant sound investigation by Ultrared, and I proposed to start from a question, which was, what is the sound of the border in Hong Kong? Well, it was my intention, but it was not easy at all. So first of all, we went for a sound walk on the physical border between mainland China and Hong Kong. And we were listening to the border, experiencing the border, but also playing the border. I suggested the participant to play the border. So this is just this sound generated another sound that we could not hear because the sensor in the word triggered an alarm at the police station. So immediately the police arrived and interrupted our sound walk. But I think that this interruption actually helped us to deal with borders and their effects in more direct ways, generating a lot of reflections on our listening experience in relationship with the notion of welcome, unwelcome, authority, control, surveillance, alert, fear, safeness, unsafeness, familiarity, unfamiliarity. So we were able really to discuss our perception and our experience of the border, and a lot of personal stories emerged. And then the next day we should have gone for another walk in the financial area to try to experience some of the less visible borders which are inside of urban space, so less, more transparent apparatuses of control and selection. But actually there was a sort of typhoon, so we found ourselves trapped in a coffee shop close just in front of the square where the umbrella revolution took place, where they used to gather in 2014. And so this was an occasion to actually go deeper into our discussion, and to also deconstruct some of our preconception. So we started to look at the way languages organize difference and how nation states build themselves in and through languages, imposing unity on a pre-existing multilingualism, because, for example, Mandarin is more and more imposed in public schools in Hong Kong. And as a result, Cantonese is becoming a strong symbol of identity for Hong Kongers. But Cantonese is also Cantonese as a national language is also a fiction built by Hong Kong itself on a pre-existing multilingualism, because Hong Kong has been the home of people coming from all around China, so with different languages, etc. And we also discuss the sound that define Hong Kong identity, just to recognize that many of these sounds are actually linked to the colonial period, such as the sound of horse racing, which was considered as a sound defining the identity of Hong Kong, or this sound also pertains to cultural practices that actually go across border, taking different shapes as they travel. So I think in this way we started to complexify our vision of identity and start to understand the identity as an ongoing production and relational process, always embed with difference and hybridization. And so identity as a becoming rather than being. I quote here Stuart Hall in his essay, Cultural Identity and Diaspora. And then we tried also to find, to understand how others experience the border in Hong Kong by talking with some activists, especially activists working with, I cannot say asylum seeker because Hong Kong has never signed the international convention, the International Asylum Convention. Unlike China, who did sign the convention. So there are people displaced there that cannot stay. They don't have the right to ask for asylum, but they cannot go, but still live there since decades and sometimes have children. And so we met some activists working with these displaced people in order to reflect on how less privileged communities and social groups are affected by borders in Hong Kong in relationship with law, civil rights and freedom of movement, but also with everyday racism and preconception in Hong Kong. And then we try to find a way to, summarize all these. So we had a collective listening session at the end of this first part of our program, where every participant made us listen to a recording defining the sound of the border. And then we tried to find some keywords starting from our overall process of listening together. And the next step was a research trip that I had proposed to go to China to continue our inquiry, but it was not possible. So I had decided to work, to continue our work, to focus more in depth on personal and collective identity and their complexity, and to do it from a particular perspective, so that of a stranger who arrived in a place that she or he doesn't know. Our trip was in Hanoi. I haven't said it, I think. So in Vietnam. So walking again was one of the methodologies, because I wanted to make listening derive to focusing on welcoming and welcoming sounds, and to translate itineraries into experiential maps. And I also proposed some listening exercises and scores to the participants. So we started discussing essentialist or non-essentialist vision of identity, making listening exercises, but actually everything changed because we arrived in Hanoi on Monday, June 10. So the day after the first demonstration against the extradition deal in Hong Kong took place. So there were like 2 million people, 1/3 of the Hong Kong population taking the streets against this law that would have allowed to extradite to China every person committing any crime in Hong Kong. And basically we find ourselves connected non-stop in order to understand what was going on, because there were demonstrations again in the next days. Police were replying with extreme violence, so we were all the time connected, calling people in Hong Kong, connected to the news, connecting on social network. So after the first day in this situation, I talked to the participant and I proposed them to change completely our plans, because basically we couldn't continue working together if we didn't make this situation the center of our work. So we decided to use the space we had in Hanoi in a space of remote listening, connection, transmission, and amplification on what was happening in Hong Kong from a distance. So starting from our own displacement there. And so we started working from this point, from this entry point. And everybody did a different project and find his own way to deal with this situation. I personally made a work diffusing a field recording made by Fiona Lee during the first demonstration in Hanoi city center. And for me, it was a way to, of course, transmit what was happening in Hong Kong in a place where I was, but also a way of reactive to the fact that in Vietnam, there is no freedom of protesting. Protesting is not allowed, so you cannot have public protest in public space. And every participant also found his or her own way through this. I haven't put that in images actually because this experience is still quite contradictory to me. And because since this summer, there is a new law in Hong Kong, which is even stricter. So Sound Pocket is still working on the documentation of this project, and I don't want to share anything that has not been shared by them first. And well, so I came to Hong Kong with this naive intention to listen to its borders, to challenge a representation yes, one thing that we did together was, for example, to make sitting in public space in order to tell people about the situation in Hong Kong. So it was a way of, we use in this case storytelling and the personal experience of the participant in order to try to arise attention about what was happening there. Yeah. So I was saying that I went with this naive intention of challenge and representation that creates a vision of the world which is based on the dichotomy inside, outside, and that divides us between citizen and non-citizens, and that fixes and homogenizes also our identity according to a predetermined model, that of the citizen, simplifying the complexity of the people living in a territory. So I had this good intention, but actually 1 month and a half later, the protest in Hong Kong erupted in order to defend one of the borders between Hong Kong and mainland China. So the independency of the Hong Kong legal system. And after a few months, 5 months later, the struggle against the extradition bill had become a fight for freedom and against a police state, because police violence erupted very strongly directly on the body of the demonstration. So the border manifested itself directly on the body of the demonstration, on the body of the students of the Polytechnic University, which were really engaged in the struggle, and resounded in tear gas bomb, in shots, in sirens, in a soundscape of war. That's why all these, it's still very contradictory to me, and I think need time to make sense of what this project was. But I think that this inscription of the border on the body is also connected to the process of internalization of border that I mentioned at the beginning, and that we are all experiencing during the pandemics, because all of a sudden geopolitical borders and their inaccessibility become a reality also for us. And when I say us, I speak for me as a white privileged body, as an European passport. And on the other side, we found ourselves socially distanced and secluded in our own homes. And there are many projects who has been conceived in order to respond to this situation. I think of a score now, which is included in the collection of score curated by Jeffrey French and Frédéric Leroux for the festival, Walking Festival of Sound, which is a score entitled Distance by Tomoko Hojo, which takes this social distancing process into consideration. But I would like to share with you the words of a philosopher that wrote a very powerful text during the first lockdown, and that says, what is now being tested on a global scale to the management of COVID-19 is a new way of understanding sovereignty, the body, your individual body, as a life space and as an actor of power, as a center of production and of energy consumption, has become a new territory where the violent border politics that we have been designing and testing for years on others are now expressed, now taking the form of containment measure and of a war against the virus. The new necropolitical frontier has shifted from the coastal of Greece toward the door of your home. Lesbos now starts at your doorstep, and the border is forever tightening around you, pushing you ever closer to your body. Calais blew up in your face. The new frontier is the mask. The air that you breathe has to be yours alone. The new frontier is your epidermis. The new Lampedusa is your skin. For years, we considered migrants and refugees infectious for the community and places them in detention centers, political limbos where they remain without rights and without citizenship, perpetual waiting rooms. Now we are living in the detention center in our own homes. And I add that at the same time, different technologies of biopolitical surveillance have been and are being implemented. Drones, helicopters, sanitary passport, surveillance apps installed in our mobile phones. So control and selection have been really generalized. But what the pandemics has taught us is, if we needed it, it is also that our bodies are not limited, but are porous. They are interdependent and vulnerable. And I would like to use another feminist philosopher in order to go deeper to this issue, Judith Butler, who writes, everyone is vulnerable to the virus because everyone is vulnerable to viral infection from surfaces or other human beings without establishing immunity. Vulnerability is not just the condition of being potentially harmed by another. It names the porous and interdependent character of our bodily and social lives. We are impressed upon by the environment, social words, and intimate contact. that impressionability and porosity define our embodied social lives. What another breathes out, I can breathe in, and something of my breath can find its way into yet another person. The human trace that someone leaves on an object may be well what I touch, pass along on another surface, or absorb into my own body. Humans share the air with one another and with animals. They share the surfaces of the world. They touch what others have touched, and they touch one another. These reciprocal and material modes of sharing describe a crucial dimension of our vulnerability, intertwinement, and interdependence of our embodied social life. And this vulnerability, intertwinement, and interdependence for Butler aren't a state of exception, but the ontological condition of our bodies that are always in continuity with the world and other human and non-human beings. And to me, this vulnerability and interdependence are particularly evident through listening. As we said, listening knowledge privilege, fluidity, porosity, multiplicity, relationship. And this posture, on one side, obliges us to situate ourselves, and on the other, opens up the possibility of deconstructing some of the dichotomies and binarism in our culture. So me and you, inside, outside, citizen, foreigner, belonging and otherness, inclusion and exclusion, nature and culture, human and non-human. And maybe I would like to conclude, really conclude, I've been very long, with a sentence that really touched me a year ago during a conversation I had with Brandon Labelle. We were discussing about a completely different subject, but he wrote, at a certain point, he wrote, a self-defining term of sound for me is the beginning of resituating the inside and the outside, and the lines between who is in and who is out. And well, I really think that it is exactly these lines that we need to displace today in order to conceive a new way of being together with other human and non-human beings. And that maybe listening can help us to make this displacement. And I stop here, and I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Elena. It's such a dense and interesting talk. Thanks very much. Sorry, the light's gone a bit since I last turned my camera on. I'm sure I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure the people watching also do. But yeah, thank you for giving us a great overview of artists working in relationship to borders and sound. It's not only timely and extremely important, but it's also very relevant for this festival, as the call that Jacek mentioned before. We chose a bunch of artists working kind of with these themes. So it's great that you've given us an overview and also included your own work in this as well. It's really fascinating. And my question is around kind of the ethics of this stuff. It's around, I mean, let's take the example of Jakob Kierkegaard, who goes to the Palestinian border and makes a recording and then presents it in a very different space to where it was captured. And maybe compare it to your work, where you went to Hong Kong and you worked with local people and you kind of had a dialogue with them and a dialogue with their experience and impressions of that space, a very contested space. And yeah, I guess my question is, like, who has the authority, or maybe authority is the wrong word, but the kind of permission to record or to listen to borders and to work with them artistically? Maybe my feeling personally is that with Kierkegaard's work, that's such a contested space for him to work with. I mean, he I don't know about him personally, but maybe his experience of that border is very different to somebody who has to cross it every day, for example, or somebody who lives in very close proximity to it. So my question is around kind of the ethics of this stuff, because I think it's extremely important that artists do work with these things, but there are also some complications there as well.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I actually find the same problem in my own project, in the sense that it is true that I went there and I worked with many people, both artists and non-artists, and we tried to meet as many people as possible in order to have other takes and other stories on the way different people experience borders in different ways. So I also found myself in a very different position, especially when I was back home and the struggles there was going on. So I think the most difficult part for me was since, in fact, I came to Hong Kong in April the first time. We started working on all of these issues. 1 month later, we were together in Vietnam, and the first demonstration erupted in Hong Kong. But then I came back to Europe, and they came back to Hong Kong. So for me, it was extremely difficult to follow what was going on in the following months from here. So I was trying to, exchange on a regular basis with some of the participants, and especially with the sound pocket people. But it was kind of really problematic for me. And actually, now I feel like I can talk about this project, but for a long time, I didn't really dare. Also because I didn't want to exploit the fact that the Hong Kong protests were becoming, very well known worldwide. In order to get, a very strange kind of promotion for a project that I did. So for quite a long time, I didn't talk about this project. But now I feel I can, because the Sound Pocket is finally making the documentation of this project available for everybody. And we also made a podcast on the relationship between field recording and the demonstration in Hong Kong. So we kept working on what happened after I went there. But I found it extremely problematic, the fact that I came there working on an issue, and then a sort of I would like to call it a war, because at a certain point it really was a war, and I was not there. I mean, it was really, really problematic for me. So I speak for me. In replying to your own question, I'm not sure I have an absolute answer. So I speak as Elena, because I'm not sure who has the authority and who doesn't. I think it's a very complex question, and one that can be answered only from a very situated point of view.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a difficult question, and I think maybe walking is maybe one way we can. I mean, walking is kind of also contested. I mean, historically, who can walk and who can't walk, but that's one way we can. It's maybe like a way which doesn't claim ownership in the same way that other practices maybe do. But it's fascinating to know that work, and to know about that work that you did, and also the police showing up. I feel like the police showing up when you're doing field recording is really like the highlight for me. That's when you're doing something right, and I'd love to do an ethnography of the police and how they interact with field recorders' work. Jacek, I'll pass to you in case you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. Thank you, Tim. I was just going to kind of maybe follow up a little bit on what you two just discussed, and I wonder if there are any projects that do precisely what you, Elena, described, that focus on the privilege of crossing borders, or the soundscapes of the privileged kind of crossing borders. So instead of creating this kind of victimization of those who cannot, to take the position of the privileged body. Have you heard of anything of that kind?
No, I don't. but maybe I need to do more research for sure, because you never. But it is true that I don't have any example at hand, taking into consideration, the privilege of having a good password that allows you to traverse the majority of borders on our Earth. On the other side, I'm not sure that always there is a sort of victimization of the people who are subjected to the borders in different way from ours. Because I think that, on the contrary, for example, the project by UltraRed gives a very empowered vision of the people protesting against the border and struggling against the border. So in that sense, I think that what emerges is people that are subjected to the border are also active agents in its contestation and in its transgression.
Yeah, no, I understand you completely. I mean, there's this easy tendency or easy trap of maybe doing even non-intentionally the victimization. But I agree completely that, I mean, it's all about sensitivity and ability to give space, perhaps, to those who have the again, kind of contested term, but have the right to speak about particular situated practice, such as border crossing, I think. Yeah. And I totally agree with that view that borders, just as borders appear differently to us, depending on our status, depending on our nationality, depending on the color of our skin, and so they sound also differently for different groups and different individuals. I wanted to ask you one more question about this more dissolved kinds of borders that we encounter more extensively today with the invasion of different automation techniques and AI. And I've been thinking about how sonority on one hand is a tool that allows to transgress borders, right? But it's also, sound and sonority can also be a trace, a scar of sorts, so to speak, that becomes a prerequisite for other kinds of bordering practices that take place outside of the actual physical, space of borders. And I've been thinking here of a project by Pedro Oliveira, who's been studying how it is kind of becoming a more and more common practice in Germany to employ AI systems to identify whether a person that is crossing a border or is about to cross the border or just crossed the border is actually coming from the country that he or she or they are stating to be coming from. And so it's basically an AI system that analyzes your accent. And as Pedro is exemplifying in his research, this whole system is actually based very much on the study of voice prints that have roots in Nazi Germany and stuff like that. So I would like to hear a little bit more about like moving away from the border as the physical site and how the sonority becomes again like a tool of transgression, but maybe more a tool of discrimination outside of the physical context of borders.
I would like to reply with an example, which is a beautiful project by Lawrence Abu Hamdam again, which is the title, I think it is The Freedom of Speech Itself, which deals very directly with all the process that you are describing. So the way the pronunciations and accents are used by the British Foreign Office. What is the name of the the control police for
like a migration office.
Yeah. In order to understand the origins or the place of birth of people demanding for asylum. So sometimes leading to histories which are almost a sheafy of people that have been sent back in a country when they've never been before, because well, the accent, it is also in a way the accent you have, it is also not something stable nor fixed. your voice, well, the accent is a sort of geopolitical marker, which is always inscribed in your voice, but is not fixed. It is something that evolves as your identity does, and that changes in relationship with the cultures, countries, languages that you speak and you come into contact with. So, well, which is an audio essay, which is really interesting to me, focus on this practice of voice prints used by the police in order to understand the countries of origin. So, for example, how the word potato is analyzed and which sounds are considered as coming from, I don't know, Palestine, and that the accent of a Palestinian is really the result of a trajectory rather than something which is fixed and stable. So in the same way as identities are.
Thank you, Elena. Yeah, I think we have a question from the audience, right, Tim? I think you're following more closely at the moment, but I think I saw.
Yeah. First off, we have one from Thought Universe. It's a great name. Asking if there was going to be notes from this presentation available anywhere, Elena.
Yeah, I had written an article years ago that I can surely share with some of the example that I showed that were included in that article. But yeah, I came back to these and I tried to think about it from the perspective that I have now, also informed by our experiences during the pandemics. It is not so easy. I could share the slides with you if anyone is interested.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would be, and we could maybe just stay in touch with this person and share it with them. Thank you very much. That's very generous. And then we have another question from Lucia Pradja, who says it's thank you for a very inspiring talk, Elena. Great work. They were also wondering, have you maybe spoken to local people in Hong Kong who are worst hit by the housing crisis and have to live in the infamous extremely cramped conditions?
Not really. We have been working more with people having migrant experiences, but not really with people with housing problems. I know it is an issue in Hong Kong, and it was already an issue when I went there, but it is true that it's not something we have dealt with. Did she? I mean,
yeah, I guess this format is very difficult to have a two-way conversation, but if you did, Lucia, then please comment in the chat, and if we have time, we can ask that question.
Maybe meanwhile, Elena, if we could return to the quote from your interview or conversation with Brandon Labelle. I would like to actually reread it, but maybe I can, or maybe if you have it in somewhere around there. I mean, he speaks, or you both speak about the need to dissolve the in and out, right? That's what I understand. That's the mission.
We weren't talking about borders, but at a certain point, I had asked him. Because this is the idea of the self as a metaphor was first introduced. I'm not sure he is the first, but at least for me, this idea comes from reading an essay written by Stephen Connor many years ago, which is The Modern Auditory Self, something like that, where he speaks of the listening and sounding subject as a membrane, which is constantly traversed by the passage of the other voices, other musics, rather than being a point. So I was asking him, Brandon, about this. I don't remember exactly. Well, we were surely talking about his work, but now I don't remember exactly why it was relevant, this metaphor, but in any case, it is relevant for me. So that's why I asked him. And well, he went on recalling some like personal story of his adolescence. And then he wrote, a self-defined in terms of sound for me is the beginning of resituating the inside and the outside and the lines between who is in and who is out.
And how do you see it as a task for artists, for instance? How do you think that task can be, or that, you know, that statement can become like a modus operandi for artists working, for example, with borders?
Well, I think it is, it is a big task, because I think all of the work we have to do today is really to, find other way to understanding our relationship with the others, with the words, and with non-human beings. So that's the task. I hope that listening can be an instrument, a tool in order to create or generate or suggest other way of being together. That's what I hope. And that's, in any case, the way I understand listening in my own work. But it doesn't reply to your question.
I think it does. I mean, I don't know if I should have expected to hear a clear. That's definitely an indication. So thank you for that, Elena. Let me see if there are any more questions in our chat. I don't think so. Tim, do you have any question?
Just Lucia got back. She said no, she hasn't worked with the Hong Kong housing crisis, but she would like to. So maybe that's a collaboration waiting to happen. No, I don't have any other questions, and I'm happy to end it there if you are, Jessica, if you both are. We've been talking for a long time, and Elena, we've taken a lot of your time already, and thanks for such an extensive overview of this stuff. It's super important, and super important that we're talking about it right now as well, because I have to cross a border in a few days, and it's a lot more difficult than it used to be. And I'm white and have a European passport. Well, I have a British passport, which is not really European anymore. But I've never had problem crossing borders, and now it's much more difficult than it used to be, at least. So yes, like if we can end it there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elena. And for those who are still following us on YouTube, I just have one announcement or a couple of announcements. We still continue to the 25th, so you'll be able to also revisit Elena's talk. She kindly agreed to have her talk on our YouTube channel. So for those who connected at some point, or if you have any people in your circle who would be interested to watch it, it will be available. Otherwise, we have also some other events still. Please consult our program. And as Elena was mentioning, and I mentioned at the beginning, we have the radio, which continuously broadcasts pieces related to the subject in question, borders. So please check it out. And otherwise, I just want to mention one thing, that the trailer that you saw at the beginning, it was designed by Artur Kiraga from Poland, who was collaborating with us on the graphic kind of identity around the festival. And at some point in the process, we decided to kind of break out from the very kind of digital, maybe even corporate look of the trailer, and introduce these transitions into actual situations that you throughout the festival have been kind of proposed. We had ruins, for instance. We had different situations that also pertain to subjects that we discuss. We have environmental subjects, we have more cultural or historical. And today we had the trailer that ended with a view of a barbed wire, which is a little place I visited in Switzerland, and Tim was actually there too. It's Vallorbe. It's a small town in Jura Mountains, so it's close to the border with France. And there's a kind of a massive fortification that the Swiss, I can return to my view, that the Swiss government decided to build during the war in case of the invasion of Nazis from the French side. And this barbed wire still exists there. And the one that you saw is actually used as a fencing device for the cows and livestock that is basically walking around the pastures. And I plugged the contact microphones to it, and as you could hear, there was a little ticking sound, proving the connection to some electricity. So I was thinking that maybe to end our talk today, I will just play it again. So for those who want to stick around, there will be some sound. And also I wanted to end our talk with a little poem I just discovered recently, which is a creation of Allende Bonifacio, who is a Latin American poet, and he's also a professor at the Toledo University. And he wrote this beautiful book of poems that was released last year, which is called To River, We Are All Migrants. And in this collection, he has a beautiful piece called To Walk Backwards, which at least partially discusses the idea of borders or migration, at least. And so I will leave you with this. Please have a look, read through, and listen to the little sound in the background. And otherwise, we will see you hopefully in one of the few events that are still in our program before we close on Sunday, the 25th. Thank you, Elena, again. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks, Jacek. Ciao.
Ciao.
Relations.